From the outside, everything looked ideal. Their two-story home in the Surrey countryside had a crisp white exterior, rose bushes blooming neatly along the front path, and the comforting smell of fresh bread often wafted from the kitchen window. Neighbors saw Charlotte Evans as a devoted wife and doting mother. She was always at school meetings, always hosting Sunday brunches with forced laughter, always smiling in pictures that didn't reflect her reality. But inside those pristine walls, silence screamed louder than words ever could. Charlotte had once been full of life, curious, warm, laughing from her belly. But over the years, Daniel's subtle need for control had slowly chipped away at her spirit. It wasn't physical, not in the way bruises left visible marks, but in the way his words carefully eroded her confidence. "You're lucky I put up with you," he once whispered after she spilled wine on his shirt. "Maybe if you weren't so boring I wouldn't need to stay late at the office." At first she fought back. She cried, she shouted, she begged him to talk like they used to. But every protest made him colder. He'd walk out mid-argument, return hours later with a cold kiss to the forehead and the kind of silence that punished harder than any insult. So eventually she stopped fighting. She told herself she stayed for the kids. For Emily and Henry. She convinced herself they needed a stable home, two parents, even if one of them was never truly present. At night, once the children were asleep, she'd lie in bed beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling. He never touched her anymore. And if he did, it wasn't out of love. It was obligation, routine, or worse, power. The mirror had become her worst enemy. It reflected a woman she didn't recognize. Hollow eyes. Faint lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Shoulders that curled in as if trying to disappear. She spent her days moving like a ghost. The routine was her armor. Wake up. Pack lunches. School drop-offs. Clean. Pretend. Repeat. But underneath the routine, a slow storm was gathering. Emily turned 14 that Saturday. Charlotte had spent the entire week preparing. Homemade cake, pink balloons, carefully wrapped gifts. It was the one day she insisted on perfection. One day for her daughter to feel joy, even if Charlotte herself felt none. Daniel arrived 30 minutes late. He walked in with a designer bag, sunglasses still on, and a smirk that suggested he had just come from somewhere inappropriate. "Sorry, traffic," he said as he kissed Emily on the head and ignored Charlotte completely. Charlotte's mother, Margaret, narrowed her eyes. She had never liked Daniel, though she never said so aloud. She was from a generation that believed women should make it work. As Emily opened presents, Daniel checked his phone. Constantly. Charlotte noticed the texts lighting up his screen. The name, Vanessa, popped up more than once. Her heart twisted, but she held her smile. After the guests left, Charlotte approached him in the kitchen. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Who's Vanessa?" Daniel looked up from his glass of scotch and blinked slowly. He didn't answer right away. Instead he took a sip. "You really want to do this now?" She nodded, her hands trembling. He chuckled bitterly. "Just a client. You're being dramatic." Charlotte knew better. But instead of arguing, she turned back to the sink, quietly washing dishes while her daughter laughed in the other room, still high from the birthday excitement. That night, after the kids were asleep, Daniel didn't come to bed. And Charlotte sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the garden, wondering how much longer she could keep living half a life. It was a rainy Thursday when Charlotte found the photo album. She was looking for Henry's old school papers in the attic when she stumbled upon a box she hadn't seen in years. Inside were dusty wedding pictures, family holidays, and Polaroids from the early days, when Daniel actually looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. She sat on the attic floor, flipping through the pages slowly. Her fingers stopped at one photo, their honeymoon in Cornwall. She was laughing, her head tilted back, Daniel's arm around her waist. The beach behind them glowed with sunlight. It felt like someone else's life. She realized with a jolt, she hadn't laughed like that in years. A sudden noise from downstairs snapped her out of it. She hurriedly closed the album and tucked it back in the box, but something inside her had shifted. The woman in the photo didn't deserve what she had become. That night, as Daniel slept beside her, snoring slightly, she stared at the ceiling again. But this time there was a different thought playing in her mind. Maybe love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. Emily had begun to notice things. She wasn't a child anymore, and Charlotte could see the knowing sadness in her daughter's eyes. At dinner, when Daniel barely spoke, Emily glanced between her parents like a silent referee. When Charlotte flinched at the sound of Daniel's voice, Emily's jaw would tighten. One evening, Charlotte walked past Emily's room and overheard her on the phone. "Yeah, I know. He treats her like crap. I wish she'd just leave him." Charlotte stopped in her tracks. The words hit her like a slap. Later that night, she knocked gently on Emily's door. Her daughter was curled up in bed, scrolling through her phone. "Can we talk?" Charlotte asked, sitting at the edge of the bed. Emily looked up. "Yeah." Charlotte hesitated, then whispered, "I heard what you said earlier. I want you to know I'm trying. It's not that easy." Emily didn't look away. "I know, Mom. But I hate seeing you like this." Charlotte swallowed the lump in her throat. "I stay, because I don't want you and Henry to grow up without a father." Emily looked down at her blanket. "But we're already growing up without a happy mother." Charlotte didn't sleep that night. Those words replayed over and over in her mind. She realized that in her attempt to protect her children, she might be teaching them that love looked like pain and marriage meant silence. And in that moment, something deep inside her cracked. Just a little. But sometimes that's all it takes to start an earthquake. The next morning, Charlotte drove to her mother's cottage just outside Guilford. Margaret Evans lived alone in a cozy home filled with lace curtains, antique teacups, and the faint smell of lavender. The fireplace was always on, even in spring. Margaret noticed the puffiness under Charlotte's eyes the moment she walked in. "Still not sleeping?" she asked, handing her daughter a cup of chamomile tea. Charlotte shook her head. Margaret sat across from her, silent for a moment, before placing her hand gently over Charlotte's. "You know, I watched your father treat me the same way for 35 years. Charlotte looked up sharply. I thought you two were happy." Margaret laughed softly, but there was no joy in the sound. "Darling, I was good at pretending. Just like you." That silence between them said more than words. "I stayed for you and your brother," she continued. "And I thought I was doing the right thing. But do you know what I regret the most?" Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. "What?" "That you grew up thinking that's what love looks like." The words sliced straight into her. Margaret leaned in. "Charlotte, I love your children. But don't you dare make the same mistake I did. Don't teach Emily that women are meant to endure. And don't teach Henry that silence is strength." Charlotte blinked away tears. She hadn't come for a lecture, but somehow, it was exactly what she needed. Margaret's voice softened. "You're stronger than you think. You just forgot it somewhere along the way." And just like that, the idea of leaving, a concept that once felt like betrayal, started to feel a little like survival. One Sunday afternoon, Charlotte found herself alone in the study. Daniel had taken Henry to football practice. Emily was out with friends. The house was silent. His laptop was open. She hadn't dared look through his things in years. Early in their marriage, he'd made it clear. Privacy was sacred. But his version of privacy always meant secrecy. Hers meant transparency. The screen showed a locked folder. She clicked it. A password prompt appeared. Her fingers hovered. She typed Emily's birth year, 2010. Incorrect. Their anniversary, December 6th, 08. Incorrect. Then she tried, Vanessa. It opened. Her stomach dropped. Inside were hundreds of emails, photos, and chat logs. Multiple women. Explicit conversations. Hotel bookings. Dates that overlapped with family events. One message thread with a woman named Lily had gone on for nearly 6 months. The last message was just 2 days ago. "Lily, when are you telling your wife? You said she knows nothing." "Daniel, she's too weak to leave even if she did." Charlotte sat still. Completely still. Not because she was shocked. No, the betrayal had long been suspected. But now the proof stared her in the face. It wasn't just infidelity. It was contempt. It was cruelty. And worst of all, he was right. She hadn't left. Not yet. But the flame in her chest, the one he'd spent years trying to snuff out, flickered back to life. Dinner that evening was tense. Charlotte sat across from Daniel, serving spaghetti to the kids, her hands steady, her smile robotic. Emily glanced between her parents. He felt it too. Daniel made a weak attempt at small talk. Something about work and a new contract. Charlotte just nodded. Said nothing. For once, her silence was not surrender. It was control. "You okay?" he finally asked, raising an eyebrow. She met his gaze. Her voice was calm. Peachy. The tension was so thick even Henry picked up on it. He quietly finished his meal and excused himself. After the children were upstairs, Daniel lingered by the sink as Charlotte wiped the counter. "You've been weird all day," he said. She looked at him and for the first time in years, there was no fear in her eyes. "I saw your folder," she said. He froze. Her voice didn't waver. "I saw everything." Daniel set the glass down slowly. "You had no right. And you had no right to destroy our family," she snapped, finally letting the fury rise, but with quiet dignity. "But here we are." He stepped toward her, his usual intimidation tactic. "So what now? You're leaving? You think you can survive without me?" Charlotte straightened her spine. "I think I've already been surviving without you." Daniel's jaw clenched, but he didn't reply. She walked past him without another word. Upstairs, behind her bedroom door, Charlotte's hands trembled. Her breath caught in her chest. But she had taken her first stand. And it tasted like oxygen. 2 weeks passed. Charlotte didn't confront Daniel again. She played her role, cooked meals, made the bed, smiled in public. But each smile was armor. Each step was preparation. One morning after school drop-off, she drove to the offices of Langley and Carter, a discreet law firm recommended by a support group online. Her palms were sweaty as she sat across from Claire Whitmore, a poised mid-40s divorce attorney with sharp cheekbones and a warm voice. Claire asked a simple question. "What do you want, Mrs. Evans?" And for once Charlotte answered honestly. "I want peace." Claire smiled gently. "Then let's make that happen." They spent an hour discussing assets, custody, property. Charlotte learned things she never knew she could ask for. Spousal support, full custody rights, financial protection. At the end, Claire said, "This won't be easy. But if you're ready, I'll walk with you through it." Charlotte walked out of the office and sat in her car, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't see a broken woman anymore. She saw someone who had been broken, but who was slowly learning how to rebuild. Brick by brick. A pale yellow envelope appeared on the hallway console one Wednesday evening. Charlotte noticed it immediately. It wasn't addressed. No stamp. Just placed there, deliberately. Her heart sank before she even touched it. Inside she found copies of her bank statements. Red-marked withdrawals. Payments she didn't recognize. Transfers to accounts under names she didn't know. One withdrawal had been made the same week Henry needed new shoes, and she'd hesitated to buy them, claiming they could wait until next month. Daniel stood in the kitchen drinking wine, scrolling on his phone. "Come." Unbothered. Charlotte approached, holding the papers. "What is this?" He didn't even look up. "Evidence. In case you're thinking of pulling something stupid." "Stupid? Like noticing my husband's hiding money while our son wears shoes with holes in them." He finally looked up. "You want to play hardball? I'll bury you. You have no income. No job. No savings. Everything's in my name. You want to drag the kids through court." Charlotte clenched her fists. "They're already living in a war zone. You just call it home." Daniel smiled coldly. "Go ahead. Try it. But just know if you start this, I'll finish it." She didn't respond. She walked out of the room, up the stairs and into Emily's bedroom, her safe place. She sat on the edge of the bed and wept for the first time in weeks. Not because she was afraid, but because he was right. He had the resources, the power, the manipulation. But she had one thing he didn't. A reason. Emily forgot to lock her bedroom door. Charlotte was changing the linens that afternoon when the small blue journal caught her eye, wedged beneath the pillow, its spine cracked from frequent use. She paused, hesitant, but then opened it. She hadn't read her daughter's words since she was 8 and wrote about ponies and fairy tales. But this wasn't a child's diary anymore. It was a battlefield. Mom cries in the shower. She thinks I don't hear her, but I do. Dad doesn't even look at her anymore. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever trust a man. If this is love, I don't want it. She's disappearing. Every day a little more. I'm scared one day we'll wake up and she won't be here at all. Charlotte closed the journal, her throat tight, her hands shaking. She realized something crushing. She had been surviving for the children, but they were drowning right alongside her. That evening she hugged Emily tighter than usual. Her daughter didn't ask why. She just hugged back harder. The storm came on a Friday night. Not a metaphorical one, an actual storm. Power went out across the neighborhood. The house fell into a suffocating darkness. Charlotte lit candles. Henry loved the flickering shadows on the walls. Emily pretended to be fine but kept glancing toward the stairs, where Daniel sat alone, watching the rain crash against the window. Dinner was silent. Later, when the kids went to bed, Daniel cornered Charlotte in the hallway. Candlelight danced across his face, throwing sharp shadows on his features. "So, you really think you can take them away from me?" She said nothing. He moved closer. "You really want them raised by a woman who gave up her career, who hasn't worked in over a decade?" Charlotte met his gaze. "Better than being raised by a man who treats their mother like garbage." He grabbed her wrist, not hard but firm. A gesture he'd done before. But this time she didn't flinch. "I've been recording you," she said quietly. His grip loosened. Her voice dropped even lower. "You forgot your threats, your tone, your late-night rants? These walls don't keep secrets anymore." Daniel took a step back, calculating. Charlotte turned and walked away, heart pounding. Not from fear. From power. The next Monday, Charlotte met Claire again. The lawyer had already reviewed the financial records Charlotte had brought. She was calm but firm as she laid out the plan. "We go for full custody. Spousal maintenance. You remain in the house. He can get visitation. And we push hard on the psychological manipulation and coercive control. Courts are finally starting to recognize emotional abuse." Charlotte's head swam. It was overwhelming. The logistics, the terminology, the sheer weight of dismantling a life. "But I'm scared," she admitted. "He'll try to destroy me." Claire leaned forward. "And if you do nothing, he wins by default." Charlotte bit her lip. "What if he lies? Paints me as unstable?" Claire smiled. "That's why we gather evidence. Emails. Recordings. Journals. Your daughter's testimony if needed. He may be loud, but facts are louder." Charlotte left the office with a USB drive in her pocket and a flicker of hope in her chest. As she drove home, rain streaked across the windshield, but this time, she didn't feel lost in the storm. She was starting to navigate her way out. Charlotte couldn't sleep. The house was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the hallway clock. She lay on her back, eyes open, heart racing. Then she heard it, Emily crying. Not loud sobs, but that soft, suffocated weeping that pierced right through a mother's chest. Charlotte got up quietly, patted down the hall and pushed open her daughter's door. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her knees drawn to her chest. The shadows masked her tears, but they were unmistakably there. Charlotte sat beside her, not speaking, just being there. "I hate him," Emily whispered finally. "I know I'm not supposed to say that about your dad, but I do. I hate how he talks to you. How he walks around like he's the victim. I hate that you have to pretend everything's okay just so Henry and I don't get scared." Charlotte took her hand gently. "You don't have to pretend, baby. Not anymore." Emily wiped her face. "Are we leaving?" Charlotte hesitated. "No. We're not leaving. He is." For the first time in a long while, Emily managed a small, trembling smile. "I want to help," she said. "However I can." Charlotte kissed her forehead, whispering against her skin, "You already are." The email came on a Tuesday afternoon. Charlotte had filed the formal petition for divorce. Claire submitted the evidence, the custody request, the financial records. Daniel found out at work. By the time he walked through the door that evening, his face was thunder. His tie hung loose, his shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot with fury. "You think you're clever?" he barked, slamming the door behind him so hard the wall shook. Charlotte stood calmly in the foyer. "It's done. I'm not asking anymore." He stepped forward. "You want to embarrass me? Ruin my reputation?" "You ruined that yourself," she said, voice like steel. He hurled his briefcase across the room. Papers exploded. Emily flinched upstairs. Henry called out, "Mom? Everything's fine." Charlotte called back, eyes never leaving Daniel. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "You'll regret this." "No," she said softly, "I regret staying this long." Daniel stormed past her, stomping up the stairs. Doors slammed. Walls shook. Charlotte didn't follow. She sat on the sofa, staring at the broken briefcase and scattered pages. Her hands shook, but her spine stayed straight. He had never been this scared, and never this certain. Daniel requested mediation. It was an attempt to regain control, to present himself as the calm, reasonable party. The one who wanted to talk things through. Claire advised Charlotte to attend but warned her. He'll try to manipulate you. Stay factual. Let me speak when needed. They met in a neutral office. Daniel wore his best suit. Smiled like a man who hadn't screamed threats the night before. Charlotte sat across from him with her hands folded neatly, dressed in soft blue, her voice quiet but unwavering. I want full custody, she said firmly. Daniel scoffed. You're mentally unstable. You don't work. You live off my income. And now you want to take my kids. There are kids, she corrected. And I have recordings. Journal entries. Evidence of everything you've done. Every insult. Every affair. Every threat. Daniel's jaw twitched. Claire slid a folder across the table. Including the bank statements showing your siphoning of family funds. Daniel's face changed. Just slightly. The smile faltered. Your client is bluffing, he muttered. Claire shook her head. You'd be surprised how much a silent woman sees when she finally decides to open her eyes. For the first time Daniel looked uncertain. And Charlotte? She looked unbreakable. A few nights later Henry came to her room. He was holding a stuffed bear he hadn't carried since he was 6. Mom, he asked, voice small. Why is Dad sleeping in the guest room? Charlotte took a deep breath. Because sometimes, grown-ups stop being kind to each other. And when that happens they shouldn't stay in the same room. He nodded slowly, processing. Are you and Dad getting divorced? She nodded. Yes, sweetie. His lower lip trembled. Does that mean I'll have to live with him sometimes? Charlotte hesitated. Maybe. But we're trying to figure out what's best for you. I promise, no matter what, we'll never stop loving you. Ever. Henry climbed into her lap. I don't want you to be sad anymore. I hear you crying. Even when you think I don't. Charlotte wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his hair. She wanted to be strong for them, but in that moment she allowed herself to cry. Not the tears of a victim, but the tears of a mother finally choosing something better. For her children. For herself. It started with a ping. Charlotte was folding laundry when her phone buzzed with a notification. Then another. And another. She opened the Facebook app. Daniel had posted a long status update. A self-pitying essay that read more like a PR statement than a personal reflection. It's a sad day when the person you gave everything to turns your own children against you. I've made mistakes, but I'm still their father. I won't let lies and manipulations ruin my relationship with them. Some people choose revenge over healing. I choose peace. The comments were flooding in. Sympathizers. Coworkers. Acquaintances who only knew the charming version of him. Stay strong, mate. Don't let her break you. Kids need both parents. Hope you can sort things out like adults. You're a great dad, always have been. Charlotte stared at the screen in disbelief. Her face flushed hot with fury. She wanted to scream. To post photos of bruises that never formed but ached all the same. To upload audio clips of Daniel belittling her at 2 a.m. in a drunken haze. To scan in Emily's journal. To let the world see the man behind the mask. But she didn't. Instead she clicked Save Screenshot. Every comment. Every lie. It would all become evidence. Then she messaged Claire. He's starting the smear campaign. Claire replied within minutes. Good. Let him. He's building our case. The following week, Emily asked to talk to Claire. Alone. Charlotte was hesitant at first. She didn't want to drag her daughter into courtroom drama. But Emily insisted. Claire met with her privately in her office. Voice recorder running, legal guardian present. Charlotte waited outside, nerves buzzing like bees under her skin. The session lasted 45 minutes. When it was over, Claire walked out with a new look in her eyes. One of quiet awe. She's brave, Claire said simply. And incredibly articulate. Later, when they were home, Charlotte asked gently, did it feel okay? Talking to her. Emily nodded. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. I just, finally said it out loud. About the things Dad used to say to you. To me. How he made us feel invisible. Charlotte brushed a lock of hair from her daughter's face. You're not invisible. Not anymore. Emily hesitated. I said something else too. About you. Charlotte's heart stilled. What do you mean? I told her I don't think you're weak. I told her I think you're the strongest person I know. Because even when you were breaking, you still made me breakfast and kissed me goodnight. Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect. Not painless. But honest. The court date was looming. Daniel had grown increasingly erratic. His texts to Charlotte alternated between threats and pathetic apologies. One night it was, "You'll lose everything." And the next, "I miss you. Let's talk." Charlotte didn't respond. Instead she documented every message. Claire had instructed her clearly, no replies. Let him dig his own grave. Daniel showed up at the kids' school unannounced one Friday afternoon. Tried to take Henry out early. Told the receptionist he forgot it was his week. It wasn't. The school called Charlotte immediately. She arrived 10 minutes later, her voice calm, her tone professional, but her eyes blazing. "You are not allowed to show up here without prior arrangement," she told him. He smirked. "You can't stop me from seeing my son." Charlotte turned to the school administrator. "Call the police. There's a court order in place." Daniel paled. The police arrived, warned him sternly, and escorted him off the premises. No arrest. Just a warning. But the humiliation was public. Teachers, parents, students, everyone saw. And Daniel Evans, the charming businessman, was now just another angry man in the car park, yelling at a woman who refused to cower anymore. One morning Charlotte received a letter. Not typed. Not legal. Just handwritten. It was from Daniel's mother, Eleanor Evans, a woman who had been largely absent during the marriage. Charlotte opened it hesitantly, half expecting blame or guilt-tripping. But it wasn't that. "Dear Charlotte, I don't know if I have the right to write this, but I must. I've watched from the sidelines for too long. I saw signs in Daniel long before you did. I hoped he would grow out of them. I made excuses. I shouldn't have. You were always kind to him. Too kind. I see now how much you endured. I also know what it feels like to be afraid of the man you married. I lived it. And I'm sorry I never warned you. Whatever you decide, stay, leave, rebuild, I want you to know I support you. And if you need a witness for the court, I'll be there." Charlotte read the letter twice. The woman who had once said, "Marriage takes sacrifice," now offered testimony. Charlotte folded the letter carefully, slid it into her file of evidence and stared out the window. The storm was clearing. The sky still carried bruises. But there was light on the horizon. The courtroom was colder than Charlotte expected. Not in temperature, in feeling. The walls were sterile, the lighting clinical. It didn't smell like justice. It smelled like bureaucracy. She sat beside Claire, hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, Daniel appeared polished, clean-shaven in a sleek navy suit. His solicitor whispered something to him and he nodded, confident as always. But Charlotte saw through it. The confidence was brittle now. It wasn't the effortless charm of before. It was a mask cracking at the edges. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses, entered the room. "Court is now in session." Charlotte's heart pounded. The hearing began with financial disclosures. Claire walked the court through Daniel's concealed accounts, the hidden funds, the luxury spending while Charlotte managed school lunches on grocery coupons. Daniel's solicitor objected often, irrelevant, speculative, inflammatory. But Claire remained composed, her tone razor-sharp. Then came the emotional abuse testimony. Charlotte had practiced for days, but her voice still quivered as she recounted years of psychological warfare. The gaslighting, the subtle punishments, the weaponized silence. Daniel shook his head dramatically. He even chuckled once and the judge shot him a look that could freeze fire. When the first day ended, Charlotte stepped out of the courtroom trembling but intact. Emily was waiting outside with Margaret. She ran up and hugged her mother. "How did it go?" she whispered. Charlotte didn't answer immediately, but she smiled. And for the first time in years it reached her eyes. The second day of the hearing was more delicate. Henry was scheduled for a closed-door interview with the court-appointed child advocate. Charlotte had cried alone in the shower that morning, not because she didn't trust him, but because she hated that her 10-year-old was being asked to speak about his own father in such a way. Henry walked into the private interview room holding a small stone in his pocket, the one Charlotte had given him the night before. "When you get nervous," she told him, "just rub this with your thumb. That means I'm with you. The advocate, a kind-eyed woman named Miss Porter, asked simple questions. What's it like at home? Do you feel safe with Mom? What's your relationship with Dad like? What do you want to happen? Henry answered softly but clearly. He said he didn't understand grown-up things, but he did know this. Mom always listens when I'm scared. Dad gets mad really fast. I like seeing him sometimes, but not for too long. The advocate took notes. At one point, Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out the stone. My mom gave me this. She said it's her love. When the session ended, Miss Porter exited the room and approached Charlotte with a rare smile. You've raised a remarkable boy. Charlotte didn't cry, but she came very, very close. The third day of the hearing was supposed to be procedural. Instead, it exploded. Daniel's solicitor announced they had new evidence. A set of fabricated emails allegedly written by Charlotte to a secret lover, suggesting she'd had an affair and manipulated the children to turn against Daniel out of guilt. Claire was ready. She calmly submitted metadata analysis proving the emails were falsified. The IP address traced back to Daniel's office. The judge looked over her glasses at Daniel. This is not only inappropriate, it's dangerous, and deeply troubling. Daniel's cool began to crack. His jaw clenched, his leg bounced nervously under the table. The judge turned to him. Do you understand the consequences of submitting falsified documents to the court? He nodded. Barely. Claire leaned toward Charlotte and whispered, We've got him. But Charlotte wasn't smiling. She looked across the courtroom at the man she once loved. The man she once begged to stay present. Stay honest. Stay real. Now he was a ghost, desperate, reckless, unraveling. And she didn't feel hate. He felt nothing. And that, she realized, was freedom. The decision came a week later. Claire called at 8:13 a.m. Charlotte, we won. Charlotte stood in the kitchen, frozen in place, the words echoing in her ears. Full custody. Sole ownership of the house. A court enforced no contact order until Daniel completed a psychological evaluation and parenting therapy. Supervised visitation would begin only after approval. The court had recognized emotional abuse as central to the case. The judge's written statement even included the line, Silence can be as violent as shouting. This court sees it now. And so should the world. Charlotte hung up and collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Not because she was sad, but because after 15 years she could finally breathe. Later that evening she sat with Emily and Henry on the living room floor. They played Uno. They laughed. They ordered pizza and watched The Princess Bride for the 6th time. When Emily leaned her head on Charlotte's shoulder and said, You saved us, Charlotte kissed her hair and whispered, No, baby. You saved me. Outside the sky was clear. The house still held its scars. But it was finally, a home. Daniel was gone. His belongings had been moved out under court supervision. The house echoed differently now. The silence no longer suffocated, but it wasn't peaceful yet either. It felt like a space recovering from a storm. Charlotte stood at the head of the dining table, staring at the chair he used to sit in. Every night for years that chair had been a throne of quiet control, where he'd scowl at overcooked vegetables, criticize how Emily chewed, or dismiss Henry's stories from school. Now it was just wood and fabric. Emily passed behind her, carrying plates. You don't have to keep setting his place. Charlotte blinked. She hadn't even realized she did. That night they left the chair empty, not out of habit but as a statement. A silent goodbye. The air felt lighter. Not quite joyful, but less heavy. And for a woman who'd once lived beneath a mountain, that alone felt like a miracle. Healing, it turned out, wasn't linear. One afternoon, Charlotte had a panic attack in the supermarket. She turned down the cereal aisle and saw a man with Daniel's exact build. Same jacket, same way of walking. Her body froze before her brain could reason. Her lungs tightened, ears rang, vision blurred. She dropped the shopping basket and ran. She ended up sitting in her car for 15 minutes, shaking uncontrollably. It was the first time she realized the trauma hadn't left with Daniel. It still lived inside her, coiled like a shadow snake ready to strike at any trigger. Later she talked to Claire, then to a therapist named Dr. Imelda Reeves, a gentle woman who introduced Charlotte to the idea of emotional flashbacks. You're not broken, Dr. Reeves said in their first session. You're rewiring after years of fear. Charlotte nodded, crying softly. I thought I'd be fine once he left. He left your house, Dr. Reeves said, but not your nervous system. Yet. It became her new mission, not just to escape Daniel, but to finally reclaim herself. One Saturday morning, Charlotte opened a wardrobe she hadn't touched in years. At the back, still wrapped in dry-cleaning plastic, was the red dress, the one she'd worn to a work party long ago before Henry was born. Before she became just a wife. Before Daniel started making her feel small for wanting to feel beautiful. She remembered how confident she'd felt that night. How Daniel had whispered, "You're trying too hard." How she'd never worn it again. But now, as sunlight poured into the room, she peeled off the plastic and slipped it on. It still fit, not perfectly but authentically. She wore it to dinner with Margaret and the kids. Emily's eyes lit up. "You look like the woman in that Cornwall photo," she said. Charlotte smiled. Maybe I'm becoming her again. It was part of her therapy. Dr. Reeves had given the assignment. Write a letter to the woman you used to be, the one who stayed. Charlotte waited until the house was asleep. She poured herself tea, sat at her kitchen table, and wrote, "Dear Charlotte, you did what you thought was right. You stayed for the children. You stayed out of fear. You stayed because you believed love meant sacrifice. You were wrong. But I don't blame you. You were surviving the only way you knew how. I want you to know that we made it out. The kids are safe. You are healing. You are stronger than you ever believed. And soon, not yet but soon, you'll wake up and realize you no longer dread the day ahead. You'll laugh and mean it. You'll wear red and not apologize. You are not broken. You are reborn. Love, Charlotte." She folded the letter and placed it in a box with Emily's journal and Henry's stone. It was no longer a survival kit. It was a testament to everything she had endured and everything she was becoming. It was early spring when Charlotte received the letter. From Daniel. Handwritten. No return address. Just 4 pages folded neatly. She stared at it for an entire day before opening it. The letter was a mix of half-hearted apologies and veiled bitterness. He said he missed the children. That he was trying. That therapy was stupid but required. He talked about how hard it was for him, how no one really understood what he'd gone through. Only one line mattered. "I'd like to see them. One supervised visit. Please." Charlotte sat with the decision for a week. She talked to Claire. To Margaret. To Emily. Even to Dr. Reeves. In the end she said yes. It wasn't forgiveness. It was closure. The visit took place in a monitored facility in Croydon. Bright walls, security cameras, a play area in the corner. Charlotte brought Henry and Emily. She stayed in the observation room with a counselor. Daniel entered wearing a pressed shirt and forced smile. But his eyes, those eyes that once held cold calculation, now looked tired. Defeated. He kneeled before Henry and opened his arms. Henry didn't move. Emily sat rigid beside her brother, arms crossed. The children said very little. Daniel did most of the talking. He told stories. Just about school. Made jokes they didn't laugh at. After 30 minutes the session ended. Charlotte waited for them in the car. Henry climbed in first. Silent. Emily followed. She buckled in, then said, "He wanted to be a father today. But he should have tried 10 years ago." Charlotte didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She drove them home in quiet peace. And when she pulled into the driveway, something shifted deep in her chest. It was over. Not just the visit. The grip. The ghost. Daniel no longer owned even a whisper of her spirit. One crisp Sunday morning, Charlotte took the kids on a day trip to Brighton. It wasn't planned. They just woke up and decided, let's go somewhere we've never gone without him. They walked along the pier, played games, ate fishless chips, and bought matching sunglasses from a tacky souvenir shop. Emily insisted on taking Polaroids. Henry ate too much ice cream and got sick on the bus ride back. They all laughed about it later. That night, after the kids were asleep, Charlotte sat on the back step of the house, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of mint tea in hand, the sky full of stars. She thought about everything she'd been through. The girl she once was. The woman who broke. The mother who rose. Then she stood, went inside, and opened her laptop. She clicked on a government website she'd bookmarked long ago but never dared to open. Change of name application. Not for legal reasons. Not to hide. just to reclaim the one thing Daniel had slowly eroded. Herself. He kept her first name Charlotte. Dropped his surname, Evans. Took her mother's maiden name instead. Wells. Charlotte Wells. He said it out loud. Tasted like strength. Like soil after rain. Like rebirth. The next morning she updated the school records. The utility bills. Her passport. A year later, Charlotte stood in front of a group of women at a community center in Surrey. She wore a soft green blouse, hair pinned up, a subtle necklace her daughter gave her for her birthday. The sign behind her read, "Reclaiming your voice. Stories of survival and strength." She stepped up to the microphone and cleared her throat. "My name is Charlotte Wells. And for years I stayed silent for the children. Until one day I realized that silence was teaching them to accept pain." She paused. "And now, I speak. For them. For me. For every woman who's ever sat in a dark room, wondering if she deserves more. You do. We all do." The room fell silent. Then applause erupted. Tears. Hugs. Hope. Charlotte smiled and stepped back. Not as a victim. Not even just as a survivor. But as a woman who rebuilt her life brick by brick, and made a home in her own name. And when her phone buzzed with a message from Claire, "You're officially free," she smiled and replied, "Not free. Finally whole."